afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another online teacher chat. We're going to give everybody just a few more moments to log in and join us. So while we're waiting, take a look at the awesome birds we're going to be talking about today. All right, now that a few more people have had time to join us, welcome again. My name is Claire, and I'm one of the interpretive specialists here at the Fort Worth Zoo. As a lifelong bird nerd, I am super excited to talk to you today about one of the largest birds of prey in the world, the Andean condor. Condors are a type of vulture, and as the name suggests, they are found in the Andes Mountains in South America, usually along the western edge of the continent. Here at the zoo, we have two individuals, a male and a female. This is the male down here on the ground. He's the one with the pink head and the comb-like structure on his face. He is actually 39 years old today, so you can say happy birthday to our condor, and he weighs about 23 pounds. Up on the rock above him is our female condor. She is 33 years old. She had her birthday a little earlier this month, and she weighs 22 pounds. So they're both pretty big birds. To give you a little bit of a size comparison, a bald eagle is usually between 8 and 10 pounds. So these guys are significantly larger than the bigger birds that we're used to seeing around here. That comb-like structure that you can see on the male's face is called a caruncle, and that's something that all male Andean condors have for their entire lives, which means that you can actually tell the male and female chicks apart the day that they hatch, which is a very rare feature among birds. Another rare feature that Andean condors have is their truly impressive wingspan, which can reach up to 10.5 feet. Even with wings that big though, it can be difficult for birds this big and heavy to get up off the ground. So Andean condors prefer to roost and nest on high cliffs where the wind makes it easier for them to get up off the ground. Once they're out in the air though, Andean condors have no problem flying for long distances without using very much energy. And that's because these guys don't have to flap their wings all the time like smaller birds do. Instead, they do something called thermal soaring, where they will find a rising current of hot air to ride up on. Then they can glide along, dropping in elevation very slowly until they find another hot air current to ride back up again. By repeating this process over and over, Andean condors can fly over 100 miles a day while flapping their wings as little as once an hour. As they soar along way up there looking for their food, they are keeping a sharp eye on the ground to see if they can find anything to munch on, like this guy's doing here. As scavengers, condors don't hunt for their food like hawks and owls do. Instead, they look for things that are already dead, and then they act as nature's cleanup crew. Here at the zoo, we give our condors fresher meat than they would generally find in the wild, including rats and rabbits, as well as larger chunks of meat like the one that you see our male enjoying in here today. Unlike most birds, Andean condors actually have a really good sense of smell. So when they're out soaring around in the wild looking for food, they don't have any problem locating any rotting meat that they might happen to fly over. Now, most people think it's pretty gross to watch condors and other vultures eat their meals, especially when they're just eating roadkill, maybe in your neighborhood. But they are not just helping to make our areas nicer by cleaning up the things that smell bad, they are also helping to clean up all of that rotting meat before it becomes a breeding ground for disease. Condors condors and other vultures have extremely strong stomach acid, which means that they can eat old and rotting meat that would make you or I really, really sick. But it also means that that stomach acid is strong enough to kill any dangerous viruses or bacteria that they might consume in the process, including rabies, botulism, and anthrax. By helping to limit the spread of all of those dangerous diseases, condors and other vultures are actually playing a big role in keeping humans and other animals healthy. Without condors and vultures like these guys, we would have to deal with pandemics a lot more often. Unfortunately, though, there are still a lot of people who don't understand how important these guys really are in the environment. The Andean condor used to be revered by the Incas, who believed it to be immortal messengers of the gods, who performed the daily task of pulling the sun up into the sky. But today, vultures are typically seen as gross, and because they're always hanging around dead things, they can sometimes be mistakenly blamed for killing the things that they are really trying to clean up. That can lead to the birds being shot or poisoned by people who just don't understand how valuable they really are. As a result, Andean condors are currently listed as near threatened, with less than 7,000 of them left in the wild. To help increase the population, scientists are working with breed and release programs, as well as trying to study the species in the wild to learn more about how best to help them. Educating people about their true role in the environment is also very important, because the more people understand about how important these guys are, the more they will want to protect them. But work like that isn't just for highly trained scientists, and Andean condors are not the only birds that are worth studying and appreciating. So today, for our activity, I'm inviting you to become a citizen scientist. Fortunately, you don't have to have any fancy degrees or special training to collect valuable data for the scientific study of birds. In fact, you just need two things to get started. You need a way to tell what kind of bird it is that you're looking at, and you need a way to report what you see. If you tuned in to Kylie's chat a couple weeks ago, you learned about the bird ID app Merlin, which can help you identify the birds that you're looking at by answering a few basic questions. Then, once you've figured out what you're looking at, you can use eBird. eBird is the largest biodiversity-related citizen science project in the world. And the data that you collect helps leaders and scientists make the best possible decisions for bird conservation for species around the world, including the Andean condor. You can submit data on their website, ebird.org, or on their app, which looks like this. This is the eBird app here on my left, and then over here on the right is what the Merlin app looks like. You want to look for those and download them. So kids, have your parents help you download these apps, and then you can head out and look for the birds around you. And I can tell you from experience that once you start looking up and noticing the birds that are around you, it's like opening your eyes to a whole new world. There are birds all around you, whether you are in the middle of a nature preserve or in the grocery store parking lot. And watching for them makes every trip outside like a new and exciting treasure hunt. So kids, like I said, have your parents help you download these two apps, and then head out and see how many different birds you can find for eBird. If you want to share some of your new feathered friends with us here at the Fort Worth Zoo, feel free to post pictures and use hashtag Fort Worth Zoo on social media. But until then, and before you run out on your first bird treasure hunt, does anybody have any questions about the condors?
Yes, how can you tell the males and the females apart?
Good question. So the male is the one down here munching on this chunk of meat. Males always have that bright pink neck, and they have that comb-like structure, which is called a caruncle, on their face. The female is the one up on the rocks there above him, and she has a gray head and no comb-like structure. Fun fact, the males and females also have different colored eyes. The female's eyes are red and the male's eyes are yellow.
How many eggs do they lay at once?
They only lay one egg at a time, and they only lay eggs every other year, which is part of the reason that they are considered near threatened and there's not very many in the wild, because their populations can't easily bounce back when the numbers drop.
And how big are the babies when they hatch?
The eggs are about 5 inches long, so you can imagine that the baby would be a little bigger than that because they would be kind of all curled up inside that egg when they hatch.
And when the hatchlings hatch, do they immediately look like their parents?
Good question. No, actually the babies look quite a bit different from the parents, except that, like I mentioned at the beginning, the males always have that caruncle or that comb structure on their face. The babies tend to be different coloration in their feathers though, and it takes till they're about 6 months old for them to get all of their feathers in and be able to actually start flying.
And how do they eat all of that rotten meat and not get sick?
That's a good question, because for us, if our meat is even just a little bit off, it can give us food poisoning and make us really sick. But condors and other vultures have extremely strong stomach acid, so they can digest all sorts of crazy stuff that would be really bad for us.
And what is their lifespan?
In the wild, Andean condors can live up into their 50s or 60s, and in a zoo, they can live even into their 70s.
And do we have any raptors native to Texas?
At the zoo?
Both at the zoo and in the state.
Yes, we do. We have multiple species of raptors that are native to Texas in the wild. One of them actually lives here at the zoo, and that is the turkey vulture, which is a distant cousin of the Andean condors. They're also a scavenger and are going to be flying around looking for dead things to clean up as well.
How many different condor species are there?
There are only 2 species of condor in the world, the Andean condor and the California condor, but they are 2 of the 22 species of vulture in the world.
And how do they communicate with one another?
So vultures, like condors, actually don't have vocal cords. So they can't sing or make calls like a lot of the birds in your backyard do. Instead, these guys can just do some sort of grunting and hissing, and they will also clack their bill together if they're really upset.
So we may be hearing some birds in the background. Who is that we're hearing then?
The one that sounds a little bit like a seagull is actually an African fish eagle, and she's just down the path from the condors.
And why are there no feathers on their heads or their necks?
Good question. You'll see that on pretty much all vulture species, and that actually helps to keep them clean. We were talking about vultures generally being considered gross, but they actually have a bald head so that the rotting meat and the blood and stuff doesn't get stuck all over their head whenever they're cleaning up all of that rotting meat.
And are they social birds? Do they stay in groups?
Andean condors are considered to be monogamous, which means they mate for life. So they will tend to hang out with their mate a lot of the time. And there are some times that groups of them may gather in particular areas, but they don't travel in flocks like some other birds do.
And how long will the young stay with their parents?
The young are able to start flying at around 6 months old, but then they stay with their parents until they're about 2 years old.
And who are their predators in the wild?
So once they get to be full grown like these guys, there really isn't anything besides humans that are going to try to mess with them. They are very large birds. You can see our female spreading her wings out up there a little bit, showing you how big she is. As young ones though, they could be preyed upon by other large birds of prey or by things like foxes, if the nest is accessible to things like that.
And what are some of the things that they will eat in the wild, and how much can they carry?
Oh, good question. So these guys, like I said, will eat pretty much anything dead. They are not picky about what type of meat it is. So anything that they find already deceased. But unlike hawks and owls, these guys can't pick things up in their feet. So they have to come down and just eat what's on the ground and then fly away again. So they're not going to be picking any of that meat up and taking it home with them.
And how high can they fly?
They can reach elevations of up to 3 miles above sea level, which is pretty crazy.
And where do they build their nests?
They prefer to nest on rocky cliffs. So kind of like what you can see in the back of the exhibit there. And they don't actually build nests. Instead, they will just lay their egg right on the edge of a cliff, which seems a little bit dangerous. But the parents are really good caretakers and make sure that it doesn't fall off.
And what do they build their nest out of?
They actually don't build a nest at all. They just lay it right on the edge of the cliff and then take turns sitting on it to incubate it.
And how old are these two here?
The female, who's up high there, is 33 years old, and the male down here turned 39 today. So if you missed it at the beginning, today is our male condor's birthday.
And have they mated at the zoo?
They are part of the species survival plan for the condors, so we do want them to have eggs. So yes, they are a breeding pair.
And are they endangered?
They are currently considered near threatened, which is a type of being endangered, which is not as bad as it could be, but also not as good as it could be either.
And how do the newborn birds eat?
The newborn birds eat from their parents. So their parents will come and regurgitate food to them, or that's a fancy word for throwing it up, and feed it to their chicks.
And last question, what is your favorite bird that you've spotted in the wild?
Oh, good question. So I was talking earlier about going bird watching and using eBird, and that is one of my favorite things to do on my days off. But my favorite species that I have seen in the wild personally is a cousin of these guys, the California condor. I was lucky enough to see 3 of them flying over the Grand Canyon last summer, and that was the highlight of my entire year. California condors are even more endangered than these guys. They were, in fact, extinct in the wild less than 35 years ago. And thanks to zoos and their breeding programs, they have now been able to release more out into the wild, which are doing really well and are breeding in the wild. So there are about 300 of them wild in the western United States currently. So it was very exciting to get to see some of those. All right, well, thank you again for joining us. I hope you guys enjoy all of your birding expeditions as well as I enjoy them. And if you want to talk to us more, remember to use #FortWorthZoo on social media. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.